I wanted to thank the USC Casden Institute and Lisa Ansel for having us, and of course Shirin for sharing your documentary with us. And I will start with the questions. We'll do the Q&A, and then we'll turn it over to all of you. So, Shirin, why did you decide to make a movie about Passover? How is this holiday? We know how it's a metaphor for the Jewish people, but how specifically is it a metaphor for the Iranian Jewish community in the diaspora?
I decided to make a documentary because I was looking for the fifth question to see what the answer to that was. I wanted to create a conversation, but this actually, this happened over a few years, and it started because I had a teenager who didn't want to go to the Passover.
Was that your son?
That was my older son.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So he was questioning traditions, and that's something I was not used to. That's not how I was raised in Iran, questioning tradition. Passover, you just go. That's just the way it is. And so it was difficult, to have conversations, especially when he went to college, and then he came home and he said that, well, Passover doesn't exist, and so there's no evidence. And at that time I really felt like I needed to learn how to speak his language, so that's when my journey to grad school started, and this is my thesis for my MA in anthropology. So and also, I was talking to people around me, and I realized this really was not my problem only. It was a problem of my community. And then when I went to school and I studied about diaspora, I realized that this is not a problem. This is an issue of first-generation immigrant communities.
And where is your son now with all of this, even if he doesn't believe in the historical accuracy of the story? You do see him coming around to the significance of the community aspect of the story.
Absolutely. I think that's what he said. And for me, the film created that conversation with my children specifically, but also it has created a conversation in the community, as we have shown the film in a few different venues, and at UCLA and at Shalom and Hillel here, I really. Well, my son is not here right now. He's in Chicago. He's in graduate school. And, if there's a wedding, he's like, well, why was I not invited?
So it's definitely changed.
He definitely wants to be part of the community.
Right.
And, I said this to this person, I should go get him a book and be nice to them. I want to come to Shabbat dinner. The first time he comes, anytime he comes, the first person he calls is his grandma, because she makes really good food. And that's, it's not about, intellectual conversations or beliefs or anything. It's just, I want to see grandma, I want to come to Shabbat.
That's another question I wanted to ask you about. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of Persian food and how it passes on cultural identity as Iranian Jews are outside of Iran?
I think, Persian food in terms of Passover.
In terms of Passover, in terms of what people are eating at Shabbat dinners, and because nowadays, as we see, the first generation of any community, they're losing. They're not going to Iran to know what Iran looks like, smells like, but what they do know is the smell of gondi, or they do know the smell of the stews. So can you expound on that a little, the significance of food to pass on cultural identity?
Absolutely. I think, the Shabbat, that Iranian Jewish community takes it very seriously. And I think when my kids grew up, every weekend, we would be Shabbat dinner at my parents and Shabbat lunch at my husband. It was a little bit much, I have to say. We were very young and trying to find our careers, and just being there all the time. I don't know if we really appreciated it as much, but in retrospect, I realized that it really created a bond. Because, when you eat together, it's just like Thanksgiving. It's like anything American. It's global. It's something that when you have food, there is peace. When you have food, there is love. there's light, there is life. It's really good. In terms of Passover, I think there is the traditional the symbolic foods that have a significance, and then also the food that you eat at the table, and also the cookies and the things that you make. Those are all different aspects that we can discuss if you want.
There's as generations grow in America, there's going to be rituals that are going to eventually be obsolete during Passover. What ritual would you hope is really retained through the generations to come?
I think for us, for me as an Iranian Jew who experienced Passover in Iran, anytime, or Americans who know us, American Ashkenazi friends, they say, "Oh, Passover, Dayenu."
Right.
That's everybody says Dayenu because it's the one that you get up and you get animated and it's fun and all that. I do think that the significance is changing. I see that young people love it because it's fun, but I think this fun is a little bit different than the fun that there was when we grew up. When I grew up, I think Passover for us had the meaning of longing for freedom. Because, as kids, we were, they would say, you're a kid. So when we go there, don't talk, go sit over there. We're going to bring the food. Right. Don't eat it. You have to wait until they ask you. Yes, and you're a big kid now, so you should know. You're a big girl. You should know these things.
And just to place it into context, when did you move to America? How old were you?
I was 18, and I had got my high school diploma, and I came here. And I had lived in Iran for 7 years after the revolution. So I experienced, that type of restriction and longing for freedom in that way, too. But, when I think, Jews in general, not us, because my parents and I lived in a very good era, the golden era of, Jews living in Iran under the Shah and Reza Shah, when you had rights, there was ample education opportunity, But for my grandparents, they really didn't have those rights, and they would be beaten up going to school. Or, my father's father, who was born 130 years ago, he couldn't even read and write in Farsi because he was not allowed to Jews in certain provinces. So there really was a lot of restriction, depending on, where in Iran you lived, obviously. Women, children, we didn't really have agency. We didn't have rights. So going to Passover was a longing for it, even though we knew that we're not supposed to be eating this bread for like 8 days, or we can't have any dairy for 8 days. We were longing for that dayenu, that moment when you can get up and then go and beat up all those other people who have agency over you. So, here it's not that way. Here children have agency over their parents, right? I think, the whole idea of longing for freedom is a little bit different. The context is changing. That's what I'm trying to say in terms of that tradition.
You talk about children, and what we're seeing a lot more, and as you place it in this context, in the past, maybe in Iran, children were seen and not heard. But as you're seeing in this Passover Seder, I think when you see in a lot of Iranian Jewish homes during just Shabbat, Passover, all the religious holidays, children are really at the forefront of saying their prayers. They're the ones who could basically probably read Hebrew better than their parents could, because even if you are an Iranian Jewish young adult growing up in Iran and you went to Madrasa Etefaq or some of the Persian Jewish day schools, you still didn't learn Hebrew very well. It wasn't really about learning Hebrew more than it was about assimilation and keeping Persian Jewish kids together so they wouldn't, God forbid, marry a Muslim or something like that. It was really more cultural than it was religious. So what we're seeing is that the younger generation, a lot of the kids who are born in America, being raised in Jewish day schools, have a better understanding of Hebrew and Judaism than their parents do. maybe not their grandparents if they grew up in the Alliance schools or something like that. So as children are growing up in America, and there's this concept of assimilation and acculturation into American identity, how important is it to keep Iranian identity, and then how important is it to keep Jewish identity? Do you see them going against each other? Do you see them working with each other? We saw this video, we saw this young girl who is a Ba'alat Tshuva, I assume. She's practicing Orthodox Judaism, as we see with how strict she is about keeping kosher, and this is a whole new phenomenon that we're seeing in the Iranian Jewish community. And you didn't have that type of orthodoxy in Iran and glatt kosher and stuff. So how do you see the two coming together?
I think the two are, both of them are very important. It's like your mom and your dad, that thing. You need both. You need, if you wanted to have that type of generational continuity. But I think, Judaism is Judaism. The halacha is there. The law is there. Our children are going to religious schools, either day school or not, and you explained that. So they learn a lot more than we did. When we were kids, we would just go to Passover, even though we would learn a little bit. So we just would get bored. But here they know they have agency. They understand. But I think the gap that's happening between the parents and the children is the problem, which is why I think it is important to keep that generational continuity of, bringing the Iranian values. It's
I'm sorry to interrupt. Why do you think there is a gap?
Yeah, I will bring. I think that gap is happening because in Iran, the social consciousness of people consisted of thinking like Rumi or Sa'di, which is the master poems of Iranian poets of Iranian community. And, those poets were at the same time that the Babylonian Talmud was being written in Persia. Mm-hmm. So these are very parallel concepts that happened at that time. And so for us as Iranians, we lived there. It was not a consumer society. Mom would make food at home. We would, not go buying new stuff all the time, but we would clean the stuff we had for spring. So it's very much of a recycling and, but here it's a different society. And I think a lot of the children who go to either, people go to Chabad and they are introduced to certain ideas, and then they go to university, they either go this way or you go this way. Like my son would say, well, this doesn't exist. My niece, she actually went and she became extremely orthodox, ultra-orthodox, I don't know what you call it, but, everything is so rigid. And then when her friend came from Sfat, she was telling me, she said, it's fantastic. In Sfat, they told us about how amazing it is. People are not materialistic. And I said, well, these are all Persian concepts. We lived like this. That's how we came here until they said, well, there's a sale at Marshall's. You have to go, you learn, you have to relearn your way of being. And, you will, I guess, Americanize in that way. But that gap is happening because the Iranian children don't know about the Iranian culture. Yes, they know about the music a little bit. They know about they whatever they get in the air, they catch it. The stuff that's about the food that we eat or the family gathering. That's wonderful, and that's, I think, what we bring to this culture. But I think what we really are missing is to study Persian literature and alphabet and to read and to write and to understand the culture, not to be afraid. I think Iranian Jews had this fear of, living in Iranian revolution, which didn't give them much rights, and then their grandparents, had this fear that was kind of moving in them. So they sort of didn't want to go back to Iran or become Iranian necessarily. They kind of wanted to move forward and become American, embrace their freedom, enjoy that. But I think, that time is past, and right now there's a lot of, everybody's talking about Nowruz here. In USC there's a Persian studies. In Beverly Hills schools, I know that they have Persian that now they're introducing to read and write to children. And, I think that's a really nice thing to do, to teach our children and not to be afraid of our heritage. I think both, because we are learning. My kids went to Hebrew high school 3 days a week after their bar mitzvah. Before that, they went to Adat Shalom, which is a conservative, shul. And so within that context, they studied Talmud. They understood about Jews and media and, Corinth. So they discussed all of these things. They know how to ask questions. They know about all of this. But I think if they also know a little bit more about this other side of their parents, why they are this way or why they do that, it's a lot easier for them, I think, to understand their own roots and to move forward, because it is a very global, it is postmodern, it is global, it is digital, it is, they have Jewish identity, they have Iranian identity, they have American identity, they have their global identity, and they have to mix this four of them.
It's a lot. It's a lot of hybrid identity that they have to. A lot of
pressure.
Yes.
In Iran, we had two of them.
Right.
Half.
Right.
Even Muslims, everybody in Iran had a dual identity.
Right.
It's not just being a Jew in Iran. In Iran, Muslims, they wanted to go back to, pre-Islam, and they all talked about the big civilization, Zoroastrian, and everybody had their own, dual identity. And so it's hard, I think, for children, and yeah.
I think you're bringing up a very interesting point, because there is a desire now for, at least with my Persian Jewish students, I teach at UCLA, to really learn about Iranian history and Iranian Jewish history. My secular Muslim students know Iranian history. They know about Hafez. They know about the Pahlavis. They know about, but the Iranian Jewish students don't at all. And I commend UCLA, I commend the Casden Institute for recognizing the significance of Iranian Jewish history. It took 30 plus years, I think, for the Ashkenazi community in Los Angeles to recognize it. It took us 30 plus years as the Iranian Jewish community to appreciate it. I think when Iranian Jews came, they were such in survival mode. They just escaped a anti-Semitic regime, so the most important thing was that Jewish identity, and now I think it's the opposite, where they are actually now trying to embrace and learn about the Iranian one. I know my students really like it. I know, Casden, we did an annual looking at Sephardi and Mizrahi culture in America and history, and it's something that the Jewish day schools, because they're all Ashkenazi, have never really taught and have kind of buried. And if you look at Israeli history, it's been the similar way. And now we're seeing this embrace, and it's really wonderful to see younger generations wanting to learn, well, why are my parents doing this, and what is the history behind it, and who is Rumi, and all of these interesting poets that we never grew up learning about or anything like that. So I commend you for recognizing that. You also, I write a lot about women and Iranian women, and I know that your documentary looked a lot at the rituals that Iranian women do during Passover. And a lot of them are not something that you find, it's not halachically told that you have to go and look at every single grain of rice or, to go to this extreme. Can you talk about that? Why do you think it was so important for women to do that, especially because the women weren't going at that time in Iran to synagogue? So why do you think culturally this turned into something that became going to the extreme level of spring cleaning?
I think it's something that in different parts of Iran were different. Like if you were in Tehran, it wouldn't be as intense. But Dr. Abrams, yes.
But why would you say, and will you explain to those who aren't familiar with the difference between Tehran and Hamadan, why would it be less intense in Tehran and more in the other?
Tehran was, I don't want to say it was a metropolitan city, but it was.
As the capital, the Jews were more assimilated.
It was very modern, it was the big city. The city that Dr. Abrams is talking about is a very rural, small town, and it was extremely traditional. And for many reasons, those women did this. One of them is that, and the reason I wanted to include this, even though it was very specific, is because it really is the way ancient people did it. Mm-hmm. So I sort of wanted to open a window into that part. these women's husbands came home every 6 months because they were working in a different nearby village or whatever, because Jews did not really have that many rights, and a lot of times they couldn't open a shop, or they had to go, peddling or whatnot. And they were not, well-to-do or anything. So when the husbands came, they needed to show them that, you're very important. That's part of it, that, women didn't have rights. The husband could come home with another wife and another child. So it was part of, and also they did need to really follow the halacha, and they took it as sacred. They saw it as sacred. I mean, I didn't put some, he really talked about this. This could be another film, just, his section. But they would take the bread to the, they would take the wheat to the mill, and then they would grind it, and they would sleep over there. I mean, there were all kinds of stuff that, they had to do.
Do you think some of this also has to do with the fact that Jews were historically, under Shia Islam, considered to be najas, impure, and this was a way for women to show that to their Muslim neighbors we're not impure, because look at how much we clean, and look at how clean our homes are? Yes,
definitely. Actually, I did read that in your book, and I wrote a little bit in my thesis about it. But what I heard from Dr. Abrams was, yes, this whole idea of najas, which is Muslims, they consider Jews unclean. And so actually his father was a doctor, and people would come to visit him for Passover, but they wouldn't come during Passover because it was all this eating issues. So they would wait until after Passover, and then they would come to their house, and they would visit, and all the clergy would come, and all the people in the bazaar would come. And it's very interesting how in different spaces. But the one thing was interesting to me is that last year at Adat Shalom, I went to a class on Passover. And Rabbi Lebovitz was talking about Passover. We looked into the Torah for the passages, and we looked into the Talmud. And he said that, the way I recollect it is that the halacha is that you really need to clean every grain of rice to make sure there is no impurity, and it has to be immaculate. So at that time, the women in the Middle East were sitting on the floor and cleaning these. They said, we do not want our women to go sit on their, hands and knees and work so hard. And there was not that much rice in Europe anyway, and they couldn't change the halacha. So they're like, well, it's okay. Maybe we should just not have rice. It's easier that way for us.
As we see, the grandparents' generation is getting older. These traditions are going to get passed down eventually. How do you see Passover rituals changing in the almost 40 years that Iranian Jews have been in Los Angeles post-revolution?
I think it has changed in a major way, because we lived in a totalitarian thousands of years, and with a homogeneous type of Passover Seder, regardless of how, much we were like Dr. Abrams' town, or we were in Tehran or whatnot, it was homogeneous. And the Haggadah was just written in Hebrew. There was just one text. But I think here it's different, because here it's a democratic society. There's egalitarian. Women have rights. Girls have rights. Girls learn as much as boys learn. In that society, you would memorize. This is before the assimilation and, before the 20th century. So, it's a consumer society here. The one thing that I observed before I made the film, we went to this Passover celebration, Seder, and there was a grandpa who had just arrived from Iran. He was a retired doctor. He had just retired after the 30 years that his wife had left with the kids, and now he came to join them. And, he was not even religious. And the girls are taking over the table. They're like, they would read this bracha, and then they would read that one, and they would just race through it, and they took ownership. And then the grandpa would say, dear, don't you think this one should be done this way? And they'd say, no.
Right.
And when we were in Iran, it was not
You really
the
see
case.
a gender
There was an old
difference.
guy who was sitting
Right.
at the top of the table and say, "Quiet!"
Right.
Because nobody was listening.
Right.
People didn't know. They couldn't connect. So.
I have my students read this book called The Man in the White Sharkskin Suit, and it's an autobiography of an Egyptian Jewish woman whose family has to escape under Gamal Abdel Nasser, and they go to Israel. And she talks about their Passover and how they would always say next year in Jerusalem, and how now they're in Jerusalem and they're longing and missing of Egypt because they were living very well in Egyptian society until Gamal Abdel Nasser kicked them out with the War of 56, etc. Do you think there is a part of Iranian Jews that really, as happy as they are in America and appreciate everything that America offers them, that there is that longing of going back, or that nostalgia of Iran?
Absolutely.
Is there anything in the Passover story or Passover Seder that brings that up specifically for you, that emotional attachment?
When I left Iran, I was 18, and I said to myself, I've been longing to leave this place. I'm going to go, and I'm never going to come back. And then people would ask me, but when this whole topic came about, the first thing I really thought was like, oh, my exodus and that exodus, those exoduses are parallels. I asked my dad, and he said, what do you mean? My exodus was just so much smaller than that exodus. That's the real exodus. But, I really felt that when we were walking through the mountains and deserts of Pakistan, to leave Iran and to run away because they were not giving us a passport, I really felt.
You could really relate to that story.
Wow,
yeah.
I feel like one of the Israelites living. This is how it felt. This is what it meant to leave your country, leave where for this concept of freedom.
Right.
Well,
I'm going to finish. I'm done with my questions, and what I want to do is open it up to all of you to have the opportunity to ask Shirin questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to also say thank you so much, Saba. It's
my pleasure.
An honor and pleasure. Thank you, Lisa, for making this happen. It is really an honor to be here. Thank you to my parents, my husband especially, on top of everybody. He really is the reason I do anything and everything, and anything I have ever done is because he's really been so supportive. Almost 30 years I've been married, 28, yeah, I jump ahead. My children, my aunt and friends, my mentors, my professors, society, everybody around us who really, really helped. This really would have not been possible without all the help. And thank you for all of you that you are here and supporting this. I really appreciate that you came to see. And yes, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Shirin and Saba, for your thoughtful reflections on the intersection between tradition and global culture as witnessed in the Persian Passover ritual. Both speakers have graciously offered to answer questions from the audience. If you would like to ask our discussants a question, I invite you to do so by raising your hand at this time, and I will call on you one at a time. And there is somebody in the back who will be walking around with a microphone for the Q&A part of this event. Yes.
I don't need a microphone.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, because the recording is linked to the microphone.
It's not on. Just put it on. Thank you. I appreciate very much the movie that you made. It is very, very interesting. But I would have liked to have seen other Persian communities in Iran, especially the Aramaic people, were to be mentioned in that movie. Most of Haggadah is written in Aramaic. I'm one of the people that speaks Aramaic at home.
Fantastic.
And we are by far the oldest people outside of Israel, Jews outside of Israel by far. But we kept our tradition, always keep tradition, for 2,750 years, I believe. And Iranians always kept the tradition, but they never went to extreme. My question is, like some of the Jewish people who question some of the things that Ashkenazim do, and they go to extreme, some of them. without all those, we still managed to do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that in our hometown, the women took the grain from the fields and they brought it home and cleaned it. And then they took it to the mill. One of the women in the community went to clean the mill. And everybody after that went and made the flour. So later they made matzah. That was the reason, mostly because of that. But anyway, thank you very much again. It was great, an eye-opener for me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank you. And I just want to say this was a movie that was supposed to be only 30 minutes. I have a longer version of it, which is 42 minutes. But it's been a struggle to edit because I have a lot of that information, not about Aramaic, but about Khonsar. And thank you for sharing. And maybe that's another film that needs to be really made about your experience, because I think it's very valuable to share. Absolutely. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I think we have one right here.
Thank you for this wonderful film. It's really beautiful and very sensitive. My questions are, to some degree, technical, in the sense that your cameras seem to me be not intrusive at all. It must have been very difficult to get what you got with leaving people to be very spontaneous in the way they express themselves. So I just wonder, one, without going into too many details, how you did that. And the second is, was this done in one single Passover event, or there were more than one?
Okay, first of all, coming from a filmmaker, thank you. I am honored that you are complimenting on the film. I appreciate that. This was filmed with myself and a few of my cohort. And I think the reason, one of the reasons is that a few of the Passover Seders that we went to were, a couple of them were my family. So they knew, or maybe because I had been through it, I'm comfortable, or I'm just comfortable around people. I don't know. We prepared. I think the one of them I wasn't there. I had two friends who were not Jewish, and it actually happened on the fly because one girl was gonna go with us, and then she freaked out at the last minute. She said, "Oh, I'm not gonna go. You're not there, and I'm not gonna go." I'm like, "It's tonight," So these other two girls, which one of them was a pilot. And she would just, react quickly. And she said, "Oh, we'll go. Could you go with Kara?" "Yes, I'll go." And I was blessed that they really were so nice and so helpful. But everything was very scripted, meaning like this program, everything, we did a lot of research, a lot of questions. It was really, really, really prepared. There was a lot of structure going on, and I had explained it, and we were all in the same class, so we talked about it, and they knew a lot about what's going to happen. And then these 2 nights it had to happen. All of a sudden we had been talking about it for a few months. So when they went, I guess they sort of had an idea, and they had been watching, the progress of the film and discussing. So it had kind of become their own project too. And I guess, when there's only 10 of us in the same class and we see each other every day, there's a camaraderie, and maybe that put people at ease. I'm really not sure how to answer that question. And what was the other question?
No, I think you answered, because you said they were essentially...
Well, I tell you,
but it was shot in 2 nights.
It was shot in 2 nights, basically, the Seders, but I did shoot it in basically 2 or 3 years. So if you see Mia, you see that in one of the pictures she's a baby. In the next one, she's another year later, older and then older. But the main, when it came together, was 2 nights, basically, and a year, and then a little bit back and forth. And then it's been edited for another 2 years. Yeah.
Right here.
I want to ask about the drawings. They are beautiful. And I want to know if they were done purposely for this event, for the picture, or they were done as a book about Passover independently and then harmoniously connected here.
The illustrations were maybe 30 years plus like 2 nights. I had been thinking and hoping and wondering that I really should make illustrations, and I would always think like I should make these. And actually the way it happened is that part of the my program, there was an award contest for students at USC to make a very short film, 7-minute film from the Shoah Center to go look at the footage. And I had an Armenian friend who was in our class, and she kept telling me, we should really do this. I'm like, really? I really should do this. And I really had no time because I was working full-time and putting myself to school. And so anyway, I came and I told them, I'm going to do this. And I didn't because I didn't have time, and I was coming to get a book from the library, and they said, oh, you're here to give us the film? And I said, well, I didn't do it. And she said, okay, we're going to extend the deadline so you can do it. And then I said, okay. So I took my iPhone and I started walking to the parking lot and taking pictures of the asphalt and whatever things that were disturbing and my, dirty dishes, whatever. I came to Shoah Center. I watched things for 2 days, and I learned something too about Passover by watching those, testimonies. But then I just sat down one night and I had this tablet, and I just sat down and drew them. And it was really fast. That was for the Shoah Center. So when I was ready to finish my film, I had really wanted to do that. Then I felt more confident. The one for Shoah was just feelings. It was really not figurative. But when I was doing this, I didn't have time too. So at the end, I just sat down and I did them. So I did them, and I did them for this film. I probably did like 12 of them. And then last year I did a bunch. So I did, I think, about 23 over time. But it's always been done very quickly. And I think it was more of came out of my interpretation of people who were in the film and what they thought. And I was excited that it actually happened. Thank you. Sorry, I got a little long-winded on that one. Yeah.
Again, I want to thank you. It was wonderful. I want to ask you, so I'm a mother of 3. I have 2 teenager boys. What will be your absolute tips to raise them and keeping them with the culture of Judaism? You have for me it's Israeli and whatever we have, but what will be your tips to raising children?
I think as a mother, and I don't know what my kids are going to do. I'm hoping that, my tradition is going to continue, but I think as a mother, I would say, listen to your kids. What did you say? You said they were seen and they were not heard. Right. I really think that children need to be heard, and you really need to really understand them. And when they're understood and they're heard, they will trust you, and you can have a conversation and a bond. And I think some of these can happen through rituals. Rituals could be going to the park. It could be talking in the car. But, definitely, I think Jewish rituals are very special. And to share them with them, to do stuff together, to make cookies together, which is my mom did with me. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Oh, right in the back.
Thank you so much, both of you. You were awesome. This gentleman, he was talking about a sect of Judaism, which I didn't understand quite well. Which part of Iran is he from?
Most Western Iran is people that some call themselves Kurds by mistake. Kurds are Muslims of a Sunni majority, and they live in Iraq mostly. But Kurds of Iran, they mixed a lot of Kurdish words in Aramaic. They call them Kurdish by mistake. But I come from Urmi, a town on northwest of Iran. It used to be called Rezaiye. Now it's called Urmi, like it was before. Urmiye. It means a town between two rivers in Aramaic.
Does it mean Aramaic?
It is in Aramaic, yes. And we speak fluent Aramaic at home. Most of Western Iran speak Aramaic, but it's a dying language, unfortunately. As far as I know, there are very, very, very few people in Western and Eastern Turkey who speak Aramaic, but it's also diminishing. There are Christian that they called Assyrian. They speak a form of Aramaic, but it's mixed with Christianity. There's two forms of it, Eastern and Western, and they have their own. But we as Jewish people speak Aramaic, and the people like where I come from, we try and keep it as much as we can free of any other language. And we speak, and our children speak Aramaic, unfortunately. And there are plenty of us in Israel, like a few thousand, but they all go to Hebrew. And we don't have that many people who speak Aramaic. We want to keep it because it is part of Jewish tradition. Most of Haggadah was written in Aramaic. And Jewish people throughout the ages were brought up with Aramaic. Most of our prayers are in Aramaic, and we have to try and keep it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough people.
Do you also have writings written in Aramaic?
Aramaic is written in letters of Rashi. We still write it. As far as I know, Aramaic is base language. It comes from Assyrian Empire of the time, and its alphabet is based for Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi.
Yes.
As well as Aramaic.
Wonderful.
The first alphabet started in Aramaic, as far as I know. But my knowledge is very basic.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I think this is also the same language as Jesus. Yes, and there's a book, I don't know if you read that, by Saba. Yes, Yona Saba, yes, about My Father's Paradise. Beautiful book. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Shirin and to Saba for their most thoughtful reflections on this topic. And thank you all for coming and joining us today. I would just like to remind you of this book, which is on Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews in America, which is actually guest edited by Saba Soomekh, which is for sale in the foyer right in the back. Thank you so much again for coming, and we hope to see you at a future Casden event. Good afternoon.